Carl, do you want to, for those of you who don't know you, you want to start with a quick intro in the Bureau?
Sure, I'm happy to do that. So I am Carl Smith. I ran my own shop for quite a while. And then while I was doing that, I found out about the Bureau. And we're basically a collection of creative and digital professionals that are just helping each other out every day. There are about 1,400 of us that are on the day-to-day helping. And then we've got a larger community of about 20,000 that have just come through different events and things. But if you're an owner, operator, creative director, project manager, any of those roles, you can find your people in the Bureau. I
Yeah,
did pretty good. That's the best I've ever done, I think.
I love it. In fact, a really nice transition because I was COO of different organizations, or agencies for over a decade. And I've twice been a Bureau member before on the Parallax side of being a Bureau member where we're a sponsor of the Bureau. And it's been really fun to be a part of the community prior to this role, to know the values and I think just support you all bring, because for a long time it was lonely as a COO and I didn't feel like I had great places to turn to. And that the Bureau was a really awesome spot where you could Slack, you could go to events, you could meet people who were smart and caring about other digital agencies and other agencies in general, and who are trying to figure it out too. I'm Grant Hultgren. I head up customer success over here at Parallax. We're a strategic resourcing tool where we are trying to predict and account for uncertainty. So if you are an organization that has people at the core of your product, you have talent that are out there. You don't want to be burning them out, but you don't want them sitting on the bench either. And that's what our tool is there to help you with, aligning on the supply versus demand for professional service organizations. And we're a proud sponsor of the Bureau, who has been a really great partner in this. And we're really appreciative of Carl and his team and the whole community. To get us started, though, in preparation for this, I was going back, I was doing some Googling, I was doing some ChatGPT, and a very prominent, I'll say, a Wall Street Journal back in the end of 2023 said, digital agencies are going to die in 2024. And Carl, when we were talking about this, you laughed and you're like, they say that every year. Why do they say that every year? But tell me, like, why didn't we die in 2024?
They don't know us. They don't know us. This whole thing, the first time I ever heard this was probably back in the mid 2000s when Coy Vin, who I think was at the New York Times, or he had started his own agency, and then his agency didn't do well. So he said, all right, everybody's gone. That was my take on it. But I think it's just like traditional advertising agencies went away when the internet showed up. No, they didn't. They're still there. I think what always happens is there's this thought that Squarespace is here now, and so digital agencies won't exist anymore. It's not true. It's just a tool. Same thing with AI. And so when I hear somebody say digital agencies are dying, I think they don't realize that we're not dying, we're evolving. We're shedding our skins like a snake. And they see that and they're just like, oh, that doesn't work anymore. They're in trouble. No, we're going to evolve. We're going to get smart. We're going to use all the new tools. And big corporations are going to get to a point where they don't trust themselves. And who are they going to hire? Digital agency.
Yeah, I think that's so core to this evolution of getting back to the basics of, whether it's a large client that you're working with or other smaller shops or products that you're supporting, people still need human-centric solutions. And I think smaller agencies are always more inclined and better at providing that. I think at the same time, to your point of disruptors around AI, or it could be cloud computing or cybersecurity or whatever the hot trend has been, digital agencies are also just like in our sizes, small to mediums, and even some of the larger ones, but they're really nimble in some of those teams. And I think are they dead? No, they're just redefining themselves. They're bringing a new craft. They're seeing a challenge. And with that challenge comes the opportunity. And it's that consultative mindset that from a Parallax standpoint, we hear time and time again. And it's like, well, we're just actually approaching this. We're using the same hammer, but almost on like different problems now, like this consultative multi-tool sort of thing. And it's, yeah, you still need to make sure you have the team to deliver, but that doesn't change our model at all. In fact, it might change our bill rates, but that's all data and that's okay. But I thought that was interesting going in, and that even the preeminence of AI as it's come more into 2024, that there's always that question and it comes up at the end of the year. Is the agency going to die? That model.
Now, I will say there will be some who go away because they're not run properly. right?
Yeah.
Or because of these other things. And so sometimes when we see that, it can feel like there's something wrong. But the reality is businesses go under, other businesses thrive. But this is something interesting to me, Grant. I was having a conversation about a year ago with Will Reynolds and some other folks, and we were talking about AI and the AI agencies. And I think if you look at when traditional advertising agencies try to do websites, and then they realized they had to hire a digital agency or a web shop at the time to be able to have that capability because they didn't understand it. I think in a way, we're the traditional agency this time, and now there's going to be an AI agency.
Yeah.
And there are things that we try to do, but we're also trying to keep up with everything else. So we're going to have to partner with these pure play AI agencies. I think SEO shops are becoming AI shops,
Yep.
right? They've got the math, they love the challenge, they understand algorithms. But to me, I think, especially when we start looking at young owners, which there's an absence of in digital agencies now, I think they're going to come up as these AI pure plays. And I think we have to embrace them and we have to make sure we're learning and sharing because there's going to be stuff they don't know either.
Yeah. And I think you're hitting on a really important piece where it's the general solution approach hasn't been as compelling this year as the specialized, right? And when you even look at like social and supporting from a digital marketing standpoint, do you do TikTok? And I've heard it from a lot of our customers that when they're engaging, it's like they're checking those boxes that you can go deep enough in those channels to be effective, where they're really looking for those specialists rather than the generalist who can maybe go surface level on 3 or 4 tools. And I agree with you on the AI side entirely. One, just it's so encompassing of so many different talents. You could get into data and algorithms. You could get into the mathematics behind it and neural networks. What are we really talking about? And you often hear like machine learning and AI. It's like, those are two different things. Hold on here. And so I think you're absolutely right. Like defining it, finding the specialists, the right voices to partner with are critical.
It's so funny what you just said because I was in a conversation with a prospective client for a bureau member, and they made a comment about Chat GPT being AI. And it reminded me of back when AOL was the internet. For those of you who are old like me, it's okay. No, AOL is not the internet. Okay, no, ChatGPT is not AI. It's not all AI. So history repeats itself, man. We're caught in a cycle again.
It's funny you say that because we had an all-team meeting and it came up in our all-team meeting yesterday over lunch. And the example that was given was the person stood up and there's a local newspaper here in town in Minneapolis called the Star Tribune. And it was how the internet is going to take away everyone's jobs, right? And what do we do? Okay, we all get like scared of it first, and there's fear and anxiety, and the sky is falling. And then we get emails. And what do we do with the emails? He was like, you guys might not remember this. I don't really remember this, but he was saying, you get an email. What I do, I'd print it out, I'd write my response on the email, and then I would give it to the person. And I feel like that's almost like where we're at with AI. We're just like clumsily figuring it out a little bit, but I think it's going to accelerate quickly.
And never forget that brick and mortar stores don't exist anymore.
Yeah.
So the next time you go into it, Barnes and Noble, remember that is not a thing. You're fantasizing about the old way we used to do stuff.
Yeah. Yeah. And there's actually a question here. How can agencies ensure a human-centric approach in areas like AI, cybersecurity, data analysis, especially as these fields become more complex?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. Thank you, anonymous attendee. For me, it's going to be the same as let's simplify it a little bit. Let's look at when a CMS showed up. And CMSs are starting to be the first thing that are creating their own code based on stuff. You had shops that were like handcrafted code, right? We craft our code from scratch because it's too important. I think when we look at AI and cybersecurity and all these things, the human is so important, right? We're the ones that understand what it feels like. And so I think the most important thing you can do is in your initial process, make sure you're capturing the human side of things. And in your QA, make sure that it's not, and developers, I think have trained us for this. No offense to developers who are on the call. But you ask them, okay, if I push this button, I need this to happen. Oh yeah, it happened. You just can't see it because it's 2 screens over. Oh shit, I've got to be really real. So I think that's the other part of it. It's just, we will know if something feels like it's ready for humans because humans will have been in that process the whole time.
Yeah, I would agree. I think I've been on a couple of panels here and AI's come up a lot. And the common themes there around how do we create a human-centric approach is there was one recently I did with project management group. Am I going to trust AI to be accountable for the deliverable of a project? No, I can't hold AI accountable, right? Like, how am I going to do that? Or am I going to use AI to run my team into the ground from a resource management standpoint? Like all these things, right? It will boil up. And that's that human-centric approach of what is the problem we're actually trying to solve? Is it meaningful? Should it be solved by AI? And I think it's that sort of thought leadership where if you're asking these kinds of questions, your customers are too, your clients are too.
Yeah.
They're trying to figure it out. So be a resource.
We're the filter.
Yeah.
Shop or company that decides to just let AI run things, it's going to be obvious, at least right now.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe it'll get better and better. It's bound to get better and better. It's getting better all the time. But it's got to go through a human filter. I think usability testing will become human testing, right? Like just making sure humans understand what was considered the best. But the other thing is, especially right now, there's nothing original. There's just going to be the best of the best thrown together. And I think we still have to put the icing on that to make it different.
Yeah. And I'll plug it for you, but there's an AI automation channel in the Bureau Slack that is pretty active and it's both hilarious and I would say there's actually been some fun innovations that people have shared in there too. That is, oh, ooh, that could catch.
Yeah.
So yeah, I'll plug that one for you, Carl. But there's really good discussions and it's just evolving every day.
Yep. Totally is.
All
Thanks,
right,
Grant.
Carl, you said something though too. These ownership groups of agencies, you felt like in 2024 you were hearing from them a little bit more, and that like you said, there's almost a lack of younger owners getting into the agency. What's that trend you've been seeing?
I don't know. It's interesting because we were having this conversation. I think there are definitely some owners in the bureau community that are in their 30s, and there are
Mm.
probably some that are in their late 20s. And Tom, I know Tom Beck's on here. He's with SOTA, Society of Digital Agencies. I'm giving a shout out for the other guys because they're awesome. But Tom, I'm curious if you feel any way about this, throw it in the chat. But we're just not seeing that many new shops, young shops. It feels like and we'll talk about this probably. There's this almost contraction that's probably going to happen next year as shops merge or get acquired because we're
Yeah.
seeing that's being lined up again. I can feel it. I can see the trends. So as that's happening, I don't know that there'll be these newer shops that come in. It'll probably take a few years, but what I think is happening is these newer technologies.
Yeah.
That's what you're seeing. The owners who would have opened a web shop before, a digital agency, are probably now focusing on cybersecurity. They're moving into AI. They're moving into data analysis. They're moving into these heavier kind of things. And they're doing like influencer agencies. That's the one thing we've seen that's come up is brand influencer agencies. And it's like new and fresh. I think everything ends up still coming together either through collaborations or fractional leadership
Yep.
or acquisitions.
Yeah, I would say from a data standpoint, we've had a number of customers acquired this year. Would I say it's above average? I'd have to like look at the longer data set, but it's been impactful. And I do think there's been like in 2024, there was a glowing opportunity for larger groups to say, ooh, exactly to your point, Carl, like I love that portfolio or I love that skill set talent and that's what I want. And they're finding deals just given the economic environment of 2024 so far. That was hard. And you're right, some shops folded as part of that, but I think that acquisition side, it was a very strategic and opportunistic approach by some of the larger groups to do that. I would also say, I think what's interesting as someone like my age, like getting into the craft and keeping that craft rather than saying I'm running the agency as my craft. And I hear that from even some of the older folks that we work with. That's I was a creative at heart, but now I spend all my time on HR, right? And it's you don't have to do that, right?
Yeah.
That's an intention, and we can help you with that. But that's a really common kind of cognitive dissonance almost that's occurring. That's how did I end up on this path when I was really passionate about development or creative or UX?
Yeah, no, ever since the pandemic, owners have been tired and they're trying their best, but the cost of talent's crazy. Oh, okay, talent's reasonable. Oh, people are leaving. Oh shit, I have to have a layoff. Oh, it's all these types of things. And they do. They just want to go back to the place they love, which is designing or coding or writing or whatever it might be. And so you do see that, I think, leading into this kind of contraction that's coming as well. The biggest thing for me when I see owners that are ready to move on or to move back to where they were is that they love the company. And so because most of us that started a shop or an agency, we put so much of ourselves into it, we associate ourselves with it so much. It's not healthy necessarily, but they don't want to let anybody down.
Yeah.
They want to make sure. And so they hold
So
on
much pressure.
for
Yeah.
too long, doing things they don't want to do. And it actually creates more tension and friction and causes more problems. But through a merger, through an acquisition, if they find the right group, they can hold on. The culture is going to change. There's no way to stop it, but it can still be positive.
Yeah. Tom, appreciate you saying, and if you see it in the chat here, everybody, but Tom Beck from SOA said, I think it's a good observation, Carl. Definitely aren't and won't be a lot of new web design shops to that get launched. There are young founders out there, but they're looking for new models. And it's sometimes hard to just, when a founder moves from being a freelancer with a handful of people around them to something that they want to build into a bigger company. And that absolutely would definitely echo that we hear that a lot often is, do I want the pressure that comes with the head count, right?
They never planned it. They didn't. I would say there are some shops that started after 2012 that wanted to be a business and grow and do all those things. But a lot of the craftspeople who started shops, they never expected to be responsible for 75 mortgages.
Yeah. 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 And I want everybody who's here to like hold that point because that's a really important point to the Bureau of that community. So you like you're not in it alone. And I would say it's a really important point for Parallax where we want to use that data so that you can forecast a future that you feel is reliable. And yeah, that takes a muscle to build and all that, but the goal there is to help take some of the surprises out of the day-to-day. But you do that in a lot of different ways. It's not just one tool. It's not just one community. You've got to find that right balance there. All right, we've talked about 2024. We touched on 2025 in some of the predictions, but let's dive into 2025 a little bit more. Aside from this ownership model and some of the older folks saying, ooh, what are my next steps here? Or maybe, Carl, you want to talk about that a little more. What other trends are you seeing within the 2025 kind of predictions?
I think that we're going to see much fewer middle-sized shops. I think small, nimble shops are going to be great. And by small, anything under 20, right? I think solo flyers are going to do well. I think they're going to do well as role players. They're going to get pulled in to help out some of these smaller shops when they need something. But I think the smaller shops are nimble enough, they'll be able to navigate everything. I think those shops that are in that 20 to 100 range, that they're going to struggle. I see a lot of shops get up to 30 and then they come back down under 20 and they're like, whew, it like feels better. Their systems work, all that kind of stuff. To your point about a tool like Parallax, it gives you answers that you can trust.
Yeah.
I think when you're in that growth phase from 20 to 100, and it could even be smaller than that, but when you're in that growth phase, it ends up being a situation where your systems start to fall apart, your culture starts to change rapidly, you get subcultures, you have all these things happening between the people that were there originally, the people that are coming in now, and there's just a lack of trust. Trust starts to erode, and at that point, it's just nonstop fires all over the place. But once you get over 100, I think, and it could be depending on your mix and everything, there's no fine lines on this. I think at that point, you can afford specialists.
Yep.
You can afford to partner, acquire, hire, but you're hiring a smaller group. And I think that's the other thing. I think hiring and talent is actually going to get harder in 2025. And then Grant and I did a little pinky promise not to get in too much to what happened yesterday. But I think one of the things we're going to see in 2025, a lot of people are talking about it, the guardrails on big tech are going to get removed. And Their tax situation should be less. They're going to be able to do more of what they want, which means they're going to grow and they're going to hire and they're going to increase the cost of talent. At the same time, they'll probably hire agencies as well because there's just going to be so much going on. And more than likely, the startup thing is going to get started up again.
Yeah.
So I think that's going to be another challenge. And that gets to having a robust culture and taking care of your people and appreciating that they're going to leave anyway sometimes.
Yeah, and I haven't said, OMG, getting smaller was the best thing we did in 2024. Hard, but amazing.
Right.
Specializing. And I think if I can project a little bit, if I'm wrong here, let me know. But sometimes that means specializing and understanding like that thing we were trying to do wasn't really working. And we had to spend so much effort just pushing, let's say UX, for example, along when it wasn't a core capability. And yeah, those sorts of decisions can be, yes, extremely difficult, but I appreciate you sharing. I would say I'm curious on the talent side in particular. Who was it that just announced layoffs? I forget. But big tech constantly on the layoff side. And the job market is an interesting one to me when the layoffs are occurring, especially amongst Dropbox. Thank you, Tom Beck. When you see those layoffs occurring, like for us, when I was a smaller, more nimble agency, is ooh, that's a talent opportunity. And so I think it'll be interesting, Carl, to see how that plays out, whether that talent market gets gobbled up. Especially too, one thing I've heard, which I was really surprised until I heard it like a third time, was smaller agencies, small to mid-size, going back onshore. And they said offshore costs have risen to the point where it's no longer the competitive advantage. And we're starting to see deliverability and value as an issue competitively when we're looking at that hiring talent. And that's for US versus other markets. I know it can vary a bit in the EU and in LATAM, but that was an interesting one on the hiring side too that I've been hearing about more and more.
Yeah, it did feel like late 2023 and throughout 2024, myself included, agencies relaxed a little bit. Domestic United States, North American agencies relaxed a little bit on the fact that we call it nearshoring is cute.
Yeah.
Oh no, it's not offshore. It's nearshore.
Yeah.
I can see it from here. But people now understand that like there's great talent. Yeah, the cost savings, that was what always made a lot of shops feel weird,
Yeah.
like they were taking advantage of somebody else. But now those costs have come up and there's so much great talent. And I think that does get to that idea of almost like partnering, to your point, using these employees from around the world. We can do it now.
Yeah.
So time zones are a challenge, culture can be a challenge. The English speaking or not speaking is not as big of a deal as it was.
No, I never found a language barrier. I've actually helped offshore two companies, or at least get into those markets, and I found it really successful, but it came down to expectations. A lot of the times it was more linear production-based roles. So it could be like a QA or something like that. And that's not demeaning in terms of skill set, but at least for me, for the tough human-centric problems, I just felt like I could be more confident with a team that I could actually meet with literally in a room, right? Where we could sit down. And that's not to say we didn't fly those folks in because there are really critical folks from other countries that we wanted their voices heard. But that was just a process piece that we said, in terms of value, what we're trying to deliver, we need the best problem solving minds together. And the way humans, at least in my experience, could do that was together collaboratively. Now, I know there's other tools like Miro and all sorts of stuff, and we've used those. But that I think too is part of, ooh, these problems are becoming more complex, right? And therefore we need to bring our minds together to solve them.
Yeah. While you were sharing that, I was thinking about something. This gets to what Yvonne was saying about getting smaller. I think humans want to work with humans.
Yeah.
You know, AI is not a commodity, and I don't think it's going to be a commodity for a while. I think it's going to keep evolving and changing, and there's going to be all these ongoing nuances. Like we always talk about catch the next wave, right? If it was e-com or mobile or whatever, this is going to be a wave that perpetuates for a long time. And I think the people on your team are going to be the unique thing.
Yeah.
So you get back to human centric. People want to work with people. They want to work with people who understand how to solve the problem and understand the tools. If they just wanted AI to do it, they're just going to do it themselves. Why would you even engage another group unless you just feel like that's somehow going to give you a benefit? And why would it give you a benefit? Because of the people. So I think that's the other thing. It's if you look at, we're such a cookie cutter industry. I'm sorry, everybody. We all know it. It's one person does a certain hero graphic, everybody does a certain hero graphic. One person shows their unique process, everybody shows their unique
Yep.
process. And guess what? It's not that unique. It's effective. It's great. But now when we start talking about how we lead, what our process or strategy is with AI, we can really lean in on what makes our people unique.
Yeah, and I would say not just for AI. So there's four big trends that I've continually read about in 2024. AI, of course, being one of them, cybersecurity being another, which I mean, cybersecurity is also gets into like trust factors, which I think if you look at this Venn diagram of all these trends, it's, ooh, AI, do I trust it? Where's the data coming from? How is it manipulating that data or not in order to present responses? So cybersecurity continues to be a big one. Cloud computing, I think just is okay. It's like you can easily see the extension, at least in my mind, between cybersecurity and cloud computing. Where's that data stored? How is it held? What manipulations are being done on it? And the data analysis side. Like all of these pieces are like coming together. And I absolutely agree, Carl. You don't necessarily need an expert on every one of them in a room in order to start solving or looking at them holistically. But it's what problems are we bringing to them and how are we encouraging those voices to solve them in unique ways? And yeah, it seems like almost a different meal, but the same flavor in a lot of ways of past years. And it's great. We can do this then. Like, where's the anxiety coming from? Where's the fear coming from? This is this is
Yeah.
2 years all over again. We can do this. Go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, I think the fear and anxiety comes from 4 years of ups and downs,
Yeah.
4 years
Yeah, I
of
think that's
thinking.
fair.
I think, and this is, I hope this happens in 2025. We realize there is no going back to normal, right? Easy mode is over. It's going to keep changing. And I think that's part of why some people just want out.
Hmm.
Not because they have now it's hard. Not that's not because of that, but now because it's just not worth it. When they
Yeah.
look at where they are in their life and the amount of energy it's taking to do this, and people are mad at them because they didn't predict the future. It's a thing, man.
It is. I
That'll be
agree.
the quote of the event. It's a thing, man.
I agree. I think on the optimist side for me, a lot of the challenges that we hear about are, man, we just wish wallets would open back up. And it's been a tough budget year for a lot of organizations. And if not from a budgetary standpoint, there's a couple customers that I've talked to that have just said our sales cycle has gone up 50%. And it's just taken more time and more effort. And even at the about Q4 here, a lot of our customers started saying, ooh, that's easing up a little bit. That tension is, and I think that I'm hopeful, at least for our customer base, for Bureau members, that like the sales cycle just isn't as rigorous here in 2025.
Yeah. So we got asked to put a wins channel in the bureau community not too long ago. We had a venting channel that's hidden behind a bunch of doors. And it's been interesting to see the people who jump in there and promote the wins. I've always been a believer that the negative messages are going to be there a lot louder and we're going to grab a hold of them a lot more. And people, when those messages are out there, people don't want to say they had a victory. They don't want to say they landed something
Sure.
big because it feels bad. So I think we always have to look at it that way. Some people are doing okay. They just don't want to share. They don't want to be like the, yeah, we're good.
This is
Um,
easy.
yeah, exactly. So I think that becomes part of it. I think also this idea of how we sell our services changing, like you had mentioned it with productized services when we talked before. And
Yeah.
I think we're going to keep going through this. People tried membership-based services, they're trying to productize services. How can we take risk out of the equation? And I think that is part of what 2025 is going to bring up as well. A continuation of trying to put services in a box and manage to an expectation that's predefined versus necessarily going through a full discovery and doing all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. I think duration-based service offerings become a big part of that because what you're tying it to is a team. the people who are going to help you deliver. And even if you don't have that deliverable fully defined, the team is there to be relied on to help you solve it. And that's something we've seen too. Ivan again chimed in saying, yep, purse strings are loosening, but the cycle times are still long, right? Like, okay, well,
Yeah.
that helped the equation, right?
And this is a little bit of a prediction I'm just talking out of I think that we have to be careful of productizing too much. And I think we have to be careful of trying to focus on delivery at the expense of creativity.
Yep.
Because if we do that, then we are not providing that human centric kind of part. And AI is going to do just as good, right?
Right.
Maybe do better. So I think that becomes the other thing is the care and feeding of your team is going to require a variety in what it is they create. And occasionally you're going to need just a fun project that allows them to stretch their brains a little bit. And I think I hope that's part of what we see next year is, yeah, I want stability for folks for sure. Like this, the whole idea of getting into retainers more, getting into monthly payments more, getting into all that kind of predictability. I just don't want us to become so predictable that everybody gets bored.
Yeah. Yeah, no, that takes a real intention, I think, to line the right work up. Yeah, production, linear based work will be, I think, easy to commoditize and to replace in a lot of ways. But the creative, the human centric side, those kind of keywords, buzzwords that we've been talking about, I think will remain something that we can provide. All right, so we have 23 minutes left. I want to make sure we get to some Q&As. When we talk about how agencies can help themselves or anybody who's on this call listening in, they're saying, all right, well, these are great predictions. I've already lived through 2024. Some of what you said is true. Some of I haven't lived that at all, right? But what do you think sets people up in terms of navigating this unpredictability? Where do you see like the leaders in your group saying, I don't have it all figured out, but I know I'll figure it out with this?
Yeah, I would say there are a few things. First is relax. Just take some breaths. Go for that walk. Feel the cold air or the warm air or just get out of your own head and give yourself a chance to succeed. Don't keep pulling the brakes because that didn't work 2 years ago. That didn't work 3 years ago. It's not 2 or 3 years ago.
Yeah.
So I would say the first part is relax. The other is be flexible. Don't want a certain outcome and you're just bound and determined that's going to be the outcome. The more flexible you are, the more clients will be able to be flexible with you. And I guess the last part is just make sure you still want to be a part of the company when you make those decisions. If you say from now on, we're going to XYZ, do you want to work there? If you're forcing people to come back into the office or forcing them to leave the office or whatever side of whatever equation you might be on, is it really worth the angst? Is it really worth the frustration? And would you want to work there? That was a question I used to ask myself all the time. And honestly, there were times where we would make decisions and I'd be like, no, I don't want to work here anymore.
Yeah. But I think,
yeah.
No, what you're getting at though are like, don't make decisions in a vacuum. One, reflect on them personally, which is like, it takes real intention, right? What's going on all around us, things we control, things we don't control, to find those meditation points or reflection points to say, ooh, is this the right decision? Is this sort of like a fork in the road? But I will shamelessly promote you. Like that is where I found a lot of support in the bureau because I didn't have to feel like I was triggering a teammate by saying, oh, what if we went back in the office, right? And they'd be like, oh no, Grant's thinking about going back in the office. Now that means I've got to change my whole lifestyle and what's going to happen with my dog, right? And that's not my intent. It's just like, I'm thinking about these things. And I could go to the bureau and say, ops channel, ops common, will you help me? Like, who else is back in the office? Are you seeing that's a good thing? Like, how are your new hires taking this? How are the loyal, like long-term people on your team taking this? And to me, it was a really good sounding board to be like, okay, I need to think about this more, or maybe I'm overcomplicating it. And that was huge for me. So I've always been appreciative of the bureau for that, from that standpoint.
I think what you just hit on is really important to be able to ask people who understand the challenge, have lived through the pain, but have no skin in your game
Exactly it.
because they're going to be completely honest and they're going to forget about it over lunch.
Yep.
It's not going to be a thing. But yeah, we've even had a company that their team asked the owners to go back into the bureau Slack and ask the question and ask people if what they were about to do was a good idea or not, because the team thought it wasn't, but they knew they didn't have a voice.
Okay.
Right. And they were like, could you please go ask your friends in the bureau what they think? And it was a little brutal. I'll be honest. When they asked, I was like, what are you thinking? You can't do that. And I'm not going to share any more than that. But I think there is something to that. Just knowing that you have a trusted resource you can reach out to. And people, even if all they say is, that sucks, I have no clue, at least then that you're creating something new. Like this
Yeah.
group, I think we have probably close to 400 between operators and owners who focus on operations in there. If you have 400 people who've been doing what you're doing for 5 or 6 or 10 or 20 years, they're probably going to have an answer if there's one to be found.
Yeah. And what has been job security for me is at least in my personal experience, there's owners out there that they could dip into ops, right? But that wasn't their passion. And there are people in these communities that love ops, like me. Like I love efficiency and running teams and treating people well and seeing all those things come together, because when it happens is magic. And then the other times it's just grueling hard. And you're like, oh, I wish I wouldn't have done that. But like having and relying, I think, on some of those people, there are people out there that really care about communication around back to office, for example, or they really care about potential benefits that we're providing for our employees and how to best manage that for the size of your organization. And you don't just have to make a decision for the sake of making a decision. And I like, that's why I still stay active in the ops channels, because I love that like craft. I think it's so fun.
The, as you were going through that, I started thinking about one thing we saw in 23 and 24 was this influx of owners who had sold or sunset their shops that went into coaching. There's so many coaches. Some of them are great. Some of them just decided that's what they were going to do and they're not really sure. And so it's like this hot mess of good and bad. I love you all. I love you all. But I think that's where frictional roles, we're not going to call them fractional anymore. We're going to call them frictional because they do impact culture. But the idea of fractional roles, I think a lot of these coaches are going to go back into their craft, but they're going to offer it on a project basis or on a time basis. And it's interesting. I've even seen some owners who are, it almost feels like they're building their next project, their next company while they're running the shop.
Oh, interesting.
So they're like setting up a consultancy for what they do on the side.
Yep.
So I think we'll see fewer people calling themselves coaches and consultants in that way, and more people being fractional CEOs, CFOs, that sort of thing. I think it's good too, because it allows people to get talent without having to invest the big part, and they're less likely to just leave because this is what they do.
Yep. Yeah. And I think, yes. And conversely, with all those voices, whether you find it in a coach or counseling or a community, the converse that I would point to as well, and it's this pendulum that I feel like we're trying to find just right in the middle, is the data side. And so what are the tools? What are the things that you can go and more analytically say, this makes business sense, or this is an inefficiency or troublesome? Yeah, shamelessly, again, I'm going to pitch Parallax for that, because that's where we feel like we can help you navigate the data surrounding a hiring decision. But at the end of the day, Carl, like you want the community to say, is that a good culture fit?
Yeah.
Is this skill set what you actually need to deliver the work? And it's got to be multiple inputs, in my opinion. And that doesn't mean it's easy, right? In fact, that's harder in a lot of ways to balance these elements. But we've found that's the best approach when taking on this talent-centric agency model that has to be data-driven as well.
Yeah, I think I'm plugging Parallax. I think one of the things that a tool like Parallax provides to you is this ability to turn on and off things and see the impact it's going to have. And as we talk about, they're going to be AI agents we're all going to be using them if you're not already,
Yep.
right? There's going to be a research agent who goes out to grab stuff and brings you back a report. There's probably going to be a copywriting agent who writes the way that you do because you've uploaded a bunch of your stuff and they start to help with different things. But I think it's still about seeing how things impact humans. And so that's what a tool like Parallax does is it allows you to just see what every human has going on in that sense and what's the impact long term and short term if we change things around. That information is gold. That information helps you make decisions instead of standing there thinking you're rolling dice. It's at least, if nothing else, an educated guess. So I think that's really important to make sure that we are constantly embracing the best tools for what we do.
Yeah, and I think when we look at this, even at Parallax, we talk about people, process, and tools being plural because Parallax isn't this magic crystal ball. There is no magic crystal ball out there that's going to help
Doesn't
you
exist.
predict the future. And
Yeah.
so it is about deliverability, right? What are our PM tools, or how are we making sure that the work is being done in a valued way that we can get delivered on time with the right talent? And it's also everything from CRM to other operational tools to ensure that we understand how that pipeline's shaping out and that our sales team is supported in that delivery too. And that's like a huge part. So as much as we're talking about Parallax, it's got to be a cumulative effort. And I think like most people know this already that are on this call,
Yeah.
but it's got to be that data driving all of those different areas of the business, helping inform and align on the cultural communal perspective as well.
Yeah. And I think the other part of it is AI is not going to be the answer to a lot of things,
Hmm.
not for a long time. Because like we're doing the Bureau 2025 event survey stuff. And one thing that was interesting that came out of it, just to talk about 2025, we received just over 100 surveys now. And most people want costs to be in the moderate to luxury range. So they don't want it to just be cheap, whatever we do, which makes me feel like folks are, I don't want to say optimistic,
Yeah.
and things have changed since some of these surveys were given. But I think there's an anticipation that they're going to be able to afford stuff. But the other thing is, when I tried to export this information out of Typeform and load it into ChatGPT and then load it into Claude and then load it into Next AI Up, I manually looked through the results and just did one and then asked AI to do it. And if I had acted on that information, we'd be in a lot of trouble. It was like totally didn't get it. So I think that's the other thing. There are still going to be, I don't want to see, and I know it's going to keep happening. Everybody's bolting AI onto products. I think that's short-sighted. You're just trying to get a me too kind of thing when the reality is your product may be really healthy because it stays in its lane and it's really great at this one thing that's really valuable versus trying to make it be able to spin up some sort of magic sauce.
Yeah, AI does really well with a lot of normalized data.
Yep.
And guess what? A lot of tools don't do well. They don't normalize and communicate the implications of that data between each other. And we've helped customers build data lakes that are trying to normalize large data sets so that they can feed them into models and help build out what their forecasts are, even at a public IPO almost level. And that's really hard to do right now because it's still, we bid this project at 100,000, but the salesperson is, I think I can still get 150. And if you're not actually accounting for those ranges and those implications, AI only has the data that it has to go off of. And we saw that time and time again. And I agree that I don't think we're quite there yet. I think there's a huge opportunity once we cross some of those barriers, but that even almost goes back to the opportunities that exist because humans are helping develop those new architectures, those new tech stacks to say, oh, if the end goal is this, here's how we actually get there. And I think that's a big opportunity for a lot of agencies here coming up in 2025 as well.
Yeah, agreed.
All right, we have about 9 minutes left. Wanted to get to the Q&A. If anybody wants to drop them in the chat, there's something we haven't hit. If there's something you'd like us to dive a little deeper on, please let us know. There's a few elements that I have that we can speak to that I can throw your way, Kurt, if people don't chime in. But yeah, all right, we'll see who joins there if there's any questions out there. But there was a question actually Sarah had brought up related to a question I would ask. And she said, we've been seeing more resource based for a couple of years, but in the past year, a definite downward rate pressure on those resources. More firms and individuals with the skills, more gray hair in the market. Yeah, I've been there. And very difficult to prove yourself as a differentiator. When you and I were almost going back and forth, I'm seeing more duration-based productized services and maybe that, yeah, and gray hairs, yeah. And you're saying, but don't overdo it. Where do you think that balance point is? Like, how do you differentiate, but also not reinvent the wheel every time?
What's that again? I'm sorry. I was too busy playing with my white hairs.
You're saying don't over productize your services, right?
Right.
Don't get boring. And yet, from my standpoint, coming from the data side, you're
Yeah.
coming from like the selling side, right? Stand out in the marketplace. I'm saying don't reinvent the wheel because we can baseline and prove out. Where do you think the balance point is in that?
I think the real key is making sure clients feel they have a voice, depending on what you're doing. Now, if you are truly cranking out widgets and you're happy and your team's happy, then do that. Everybody's got a different thing. But I think for me, when a client feels like they're getting put on a conveyor belt, again, depending on the client, depending on the service you're offering, they don't want process to be a meat grinder. They want it to be a bandage. And they want whatever it is you're selling to be able to wrap around the problem that they have, not try to cram the problem into the box that you made, which we'll get to what type of services you have and what you're selling for sure. But for me, it's in this, Yvonne just put it in there with empathy. I think that's the human unique selling prop, right? Like humans are going to have empathy. And so we're going to be able to feel that. But to get back to Sarah's question, I think the pressure on those individual resources, I don't know. I think you do have that company of personality. You do have that idea of there's one person who's out there that's doing all the things. We see it on LinkedIn. We're all doing videos. It's going to be challenging, but I think it's a lot of it is what's always made us unique,
Yeah.
right? It's just the way we show up and we're going to attract people who want to work with us.
Anonymous attendee, and I'm sorry I missed this, but at 1227 asks, when you need to increase or decrease headcount quickly, do you have any tips on how to keep employees focused and morale high?
I do. I think what you have to do is, first of all, let the team that you have, that core team, find people they want to work with who have the skill sets available and they work in more of a freelance or solopreneur manner.
Yeah.
That way your team gets to be a part of the decision. They get to share if it was code that person wrote or design that they did or an article that they posted. And then when you reach out to them, you can say, hey, our team's interested and would love to work with you because of this.
Yeah.
So it's not, hey, we've got this need and we got to get a butt in a seat and we got to this and we got to that. Okay, it was nice seeing you. It's more of a, hey, when I work here, I have the opportunity to work with other people I find really interesting. And it's project based.
Yep.
So you don't expect that person's going to stay forever. For me, that worked really well in embracing what you would call a contractor, but embracing them as part of the culture. Just be careful from an IRS perspective, if that's a thing anymore. That was the first snark. Okay. But I think that's the main thing. You just have to make sure that person working with you feels like part of the culture and your current team feels like this is a player coming in for this special need. And I'm excited to learn from this person.
Yeah, I joined a digital agency as a second hire in 2008, pretty much right as the housing market was crashing. And during that year, we were looking at some of our competition, and two agencies, much larger than us, went out of business because they grew too fast. Two went out of business because they lost core clients and they didn't have the cash flow to sustain while they sought new ones.
Yeah.
And we took that to heart and in fact built that as part of our business model to say we didn't want to actually demonstrate the influx, the headcount jump, because exactly to your point, Carl, like we wanted intention about who we're bringing in because we were promising them a career, right? And if they left on their own accord, they left on their own accord. That's okay. but we didn't want to go through layoffs. We like wanted to avoid that as best as possible. But we also wanted to make sure that as we grew, we didn't lose the value or our identity through that growth. And that is just such a hard thing to do. But keeping morale high through that, I always thought clarity is kindness. That's Brene Brown, right? If you can be forthright with your team and discuss it with them, like they're humans, they can empathize, they can understand that pressure. No one's doing this out of negligence or anything like that. Like market conditions happen and there are repercussions. That's the way I've always taken it. All right, maybe one more question here. You talked about some of the risks that come with sharing wins and losses in your community groups. How do you encourage members to have meaningful discussions? So maybe that clarity comment is fitting here, but have meaningful discussions about some of the harder topics that come up.
I'll say the first part is, and this has been from the very first Bureau event ever, which is the Bureau Oath. And it sets a tone. And it basically says, I promise not to reveal something a reasonable person would deem sensitive or confidential.
I like that.
And what that means, it's like a verbal non-disclosure agreement. But the other thing that I think it does is it just sets the tone. If a conversation's in this channel, it stays in this channel. If it's in this room with this person, it stays in this room with this person. And we're very on purpose about making sure that anytime there's potentially sensitive information that could be shared, that we say the oath and we ask people to take it. We've had a couple of people over the years, sure, they said something they shouldn't have. Unfortunately, some of them weren't with the community anymore because that's like not a good thing. But the other thing I'll say is when somebody leaves the community for violating the oath, it reinforces the importance of the oath for the rest of us.
Yeah. And I think when people share something, empathizing and not backlashing immediately or having an emotional response, generally, like as me as a manager, they come in, they're sharing something sensitive and saying, why'd you do it that way? That's a great way to get them not to bring up their topics with you. Parenting taught me a ton about management, right? And I bear those things in mind as you try to build a space of just good communication, knowing where someone like those fuzzy boundaries can be. And every organization is a little bit different, but great question. It's 12:59. We will be, this webinar was recorded. If there's any interest in hearing us go on and on, Carl, I've had a blast, but I probably won't be listening to it back. I don't like hearing my own voice, but if anybody wants to share it out, please feel free. Carl heads up the Bureau. They are a wonderful organization. Reach out about joining them if you haven't already. If you see me in a Slack channel over there, say hi, but I would love to hear any feedback on Parallax or on ops if there's a question you have, because I love talking ops all day long. But thank you everybody for your time today. Thanks for joining us and have a great rest of your week.
There you go.